is Ryan Fuentes, and this is my presentation on my action research project as part of my Master's in Teaching program at San Diego Christian College, titled Effects of Game-Based Study Tools on History Test Preparation in Middle School. So, what inspired me to choose this as my problem to do my research on was that I observed several of my students struggling to perform well on their unit tests, and I wanted to find something to help them with their test performance. Specifically, something that I could do in the classroom that would have a positive benefit to them and their test performance. As I looked at things that affected them, I thought perhaps the students had a lack of test preparation skills or strategies that they were aware of or resources available to them. And as I started to look for things that I could use, I quickly came upon game-based study tools, because research on the impact of game-based study tools used specifically in middle school social studies classrooms are limited, and so I thought that that would be a good way I could add to the amount of research out there. So my study seeks to add to the field by researching the effectiveness of game-based test preparation, specifically in middle school social studies. Specifically, I'd like to determine if students benefit from game-based strategies of test preparation, and also if certain students benefit from that more than others. So I planned on looking at different demographics in my statistics and my data collected. My research questions in this action research project were the following. Do game-based strategies improve student retention compared to traditional study guides based on the Unit 1 test? And is the test performance of low-achieving students affected by game-based strategies as much as that of high-achieving students based on the Unit 1 test? My hypothesis was that the game-based study tools would have a significant positive impact on student performance. After being exposed to that game-based studies tool, I was looking to see that they would perform better on their following unit test than they did on one previous. I wanted to see an impact on student retention and wanted to see that advanced preparation for that upcoming test that I was looking for. So in my literature review, I outlined three main areas, and that was research on active learning, research on game-based learning, and research on effective social studies instruction. Through an application of active learning, students are able to gain both a comprehensive understanding of course material and the skills they need to excel, was something that I found. Also, according to Oster and Wiley, when it comes to incorporating active learning in the classroom, introducing only a few small changes can have dramatic effects, which was encouraging to see that even just one or two small changes or new strategies or resources that I could try could give that positive effect that I was looking for my students towards their test performance. As far as game-based learning, I found that there is evidence that game-based learning is effective in helping students retain information, which is critical because that's a big skill tested in traditional middle school social studies tests, is retention of information from the unit. And I also found success in increasing student interest and content mastery with an assortment of game-based learning strategies. And I was particularly excited by this because I thought it'd be great to not only help my students improve, but also increase their interest in the subject that I'm teaching them. Lastly, my research on effective social studies instruction showed me that I found that Devonshire and Sardone described social studies classrooms as the home for gaming and role play activities, which is also encouraging and made me feel like, okay, this really should be the right direction to head in. Despite this, though, I also found that Van Sickle found a lack of evidence to support game simulations' effectiveness, specifically in social science, as did Randell. So this kind of gave me something to battle against and hopefully show that that game-based, at least study tools, can help with test preparation in social studies, even if not game simulations. So for my methodology, my project was designed to use all of my students, and I teach 3 periods of 7th grade students and 3 periods of 8th grade students. I decided to use my 7th grade students as my treatment group and my 8th grade students as my control group. Both sets of students were given their unit tests that they already were going to be given for units 1 and 2. And before the Unit 1 test, no groups of students were given any added variable. However, after the Unit 1 test and before the Unit 2 test, my 7th grade students were given exposure to a unit review game made by the publisher of our curriculum. And the 8th grade students were instead just given a traditional study guide for the Unit 2 test. So it's looking for an increase in performance for the 7th grade students and hypothesizing to see the 8th grade students pretty much stay at where they were as far as their scores between Unit 1 and Unit 2. So when I got my data after giving the Unit 2 tests and hoping to see an increase in 7th grade scores and hypothesizing to see not much of a change in 8th grade scores, I saw almost exactly the opposite of what I was hoping for, what I was looking for. My 7th grade students overall, their scores decreased in the Unit 2 test score. And as you can see, that was in all demographics that were tested. Male students, female students, ELs, English learner students, students with IEPs, high students and low students, and those categorizations were given based off of their current GPAs. All students decreased in the Unit 2 test. So this was quite a shock to me as the researcher, quite opposite of what I was looking for. And of course I was trying to come up with an explanation for this, so I did determine a number of possible anomalies within my data collection processes that I have recommendations for future research into this topic. As far as my 8th grade students, it did go about the same, but actually there was on average an increase in scores for the 8th grade students, not by much, but there was overall an average increase in test scores between Unit 1 and Unit 2 for the 8th grade students. Deduced that there were issues with the overall sample size. Just looking at 2 different tests, I quickly thought that this isn't enough data to go off of and to answer with concrete significance these research questions. I felt that I would need a larger amount of time and tests to analyze. However, another issue that I deduced was the fidelity of the study's isolation of the effectiveness of the treatment variable. I realized there were quite a few things that were still in play as far as I hadn't standardized the amount of studying students were doing outside of the class. So some students could have been studying at home and other students may not have, and I'm not aware of that level of studying at home. Also, the tests between Unit 1 and Unit 2 are the tests given by all teachers at my site, but I wasn't sure about an equal level of difficulty between the Unit 1 and Unit 2 tests for both 7th and 8th grade. So there is a chance that the Unit 2 test had a higher difficulty level. Also, perhaps students came into the Unit 1 test with more background knowledge, because Unit 1 for 7th grade is on the fall of the Roman Empire, which is a bit of a review hopefully from 6th grade for them, because they also touch upon the Roman Empire in 6th grade. So they had more background knowledge going into that Unit 1 test than they did on the Unit 2 test, which is on the beginnings of Islam. They had almost no background knowledge going into that unit. So I realized that there were some issues with a lack of standardization between those unit tests, especially in 7th grade. So my conclusion, my findings were that on their own, the data seems to suggest the opposite of the hypothesis. If you were to just look at the data and come to a conclusion, that conclusion would be that game-based study tools actually have a negative effect on student test preparation. However, this I don't feel is an accurate finding. I feel instead it just points to issues with my data collection and my isolation of the treatment variable, as well as issues with the standardization of the unit tests, as I mentioned before. However, it was still a good personal experience for me to go through this. When I did the unit review game with my 7th grade students, they indicated that they very much enjoyed the review game and asked to do it in the future. And my own just personal observation seemed that it was helping students with their retention of the information. Now obviously that didn't, well, when comparing the Unit 2 scores with the Unit 1 scores, we see a decrease. But that doesn't tell me necessarily that they did worse than they would have on that Unit 2 test had I not done the review game. So I'm hoping that even though the data could suggest otherwise, that the review game still actually did have a positive effect on students. For future research on this topic, I would suggest that similar action research projects conducted use alternate methods of student test data collection. There's numerous things I would probably change about this. In order to just reduce the amount of variables, I would just stick with 1 grade level rather than 2 like I did in this research project. For me, I didn't think it would be an issue because of how the content in 7th and 8th grade is very different. So I didn't really see 1 grade level having an edge over the other than just 8th grade students being a year older and possibly having higher study and test preparation skills. But at the same time, I was comparing them to their own scores and not to each other. I would also recommend more closely aligned treatment and control groups and a stronger isolation of the treatment variable. I feel that one way this could happen is perhaps even giving tests within the same unit, so perhaps like a mid-unit and end-of-unit test. That way they're on the same content and not on 2 different contents where students have different sets of background knowledge. I also felt that or other ways that there could be stronger isolation of the treatment variable is sort of getting a handle on how much studying students are doing outside of class. A possibility for analyzing that could be using a parent survey where parents indicate the level of studying that their students did at home, or it could perhaps even just be a student survey as well. These are all ways that I think could improve future research on this topic and perhaps give data that is more, has less anomalies within it and could be seen as more valid. And hopefully data that aligns with the hypothesis of this study, which I have not given up on. As far as my faith integration in this research project, throughout the project as I've been conducting it, the verse that's been on my heart has been the one that has been sort of my life verse, as you could say, which would be Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. Though I was in a truly challenging time throughout the project, with what felt like way too many responsibilities and stressors, it was nice to feel that my strength still come from the Lord and sense his plans for me to prosper. I've learned that in the seasons of life where there seems to be too much to handle, I must simply put in the work that I can, make time for my own personal needs as well, and trust that God will see me through it, even at times when it seems like I don't have the time that I need or the resources that I need, or that it's just not all quite coming together. So in the end, I do feel actually strengthened by this research project process. And lastly, here are references for my presentation and for my action research project.